You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back to the show, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with Tim Hwang, who is the chairman of the board for Nitra and also the CEO and co-founder of Fiscal Note. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It is great to have you here. So I like to start off by having our guests tell a little bit about your background and what you've been innovating these days.
Yeah. So definitely have had a very diverse career, I would say, the last couple of years. And so, started off my career actually in politics, very far afield from what I'm doing today. But originally worked for a very little known senator named Senator Obama back in 2007. And then the senator decided he wanted to run for president. And so ended up joining up on the presidential campaign in 2008, going up and down the East Coast from New Hampshire all the way down to North Carolina. And then, the elections turned out pretty well for us. And so we ended up going to the White House and then, swept along the political ride. So I was probably about 17 years old at the time. And
Unbelievable.
It was a very fun experience for sure. And so I had it in my mind that I was going to do something really stupid and try and be a politician. So, I went off and ran for the Board of Education in Maryland at the age of 17, got a bunch of votes and ended up getting elected somehow. And so, so served there for one term. I was managing something like 22,000 teachers and a $4 billion budget. But, I decided, having done it once, that it wasn't, particular for me. And so, my parents were telling me to go back to school. And so I, ended up going back to college and, went to Princeton, studied politics and computer science. And, was actually on my way to HBS when, I sort of got bitten by the startup bug. And so, throughout college, I'd been interning at a bunch of different places at a venture capital firm. And, I worked at Square and the like in the early days. And, I had it sort of in my mind that I wanted to start my own company. And so, so sort of like end of 2013, going into 2014, decided that I was going to start my first company. And so, bought a one-way ticket from the East Coast to Silicon Valley. I was probably, 21 years old at the time and decided that I was going to grab two of my buddies and start a company called Fiscal Note. And so Fiscal Note, basically what we are is, we're sort of a Bloomberg terminal-like platform for laws and regulations. So people can use the software to look up laws and regulations in, about 80 different countries. And so, sort of built that company up over the last, call it eight or 9 years. Companies now, over $100 million in sales, close to 1,000 employees. We took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange last year. Interestingly enough, actually relevant for the show actually is, I would say that the plurality of our customers are actually in the healthcare pharma industries. And so, organizations like Blue Cross Blue Shield, AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, others that sort of use the platform to look up pharma regulations or reimbursement rates or whatever the case may be. So built up that company, ran it to be a publicly traded organization. And then about a year and a half ago, a buddy of mine, my former CTO at Fiscal Note, had gone off and started a couple of other companies. And then he came back and he said, hey, I have this idea, I want to start this company in the healthcare space. And so what ultimately came out of it was Nitra. So about a year and a half ago, I incorporated the company. And really, the company's sort of mission is to be essentially sort of like the all-in-one comprehensive financial platform for practitioners. And so, the vision essentially is every dollar that comes in and every dollar that goes out of a practice should be cataloged, analyzed, structured, and then available very, very instantaneously for providers to be able to understand, the business of medicine. And so, built up the software, raised something like, close to $60 million in venture capital from some very, very prominent folks, NEA, Andreessen Horowitz, SoftBank, and others. And some very cool folks, some folks like Will Smith and the like. And then, we're off to the races. And so, the platform today is deployed in several hundred practices. It's growing very, very rapidly, probably doubling, every six months or so and the like. And so, it's really sort of at a very early stage, but it's definitely exciting to sort of, be in the landscape there for sure.
Wow. It's like you've lived 10 lifetimes already. So when someone hears your story, like you just presented, I mean, it makes it seem like it's just been easy street for you, that you decided that you were going to start a business, and, you raised multiple millions in capital, and you went public, and now you're doing it again. And, what's the truth of that? Like, what has this journey been like for you?
Well, when people ask, how hard I think startups are, here's what I tell them, which is that, just to put it in relative scope. So, next year you have the Summer Olympics in Paris, and, I think the United States is probably going to send, maybe 2,500 or 3,000 athletes or so, to the Olympics. And each one of these athletes, they train their entire lives to go to the Olympics. They compete they compete in regional games and national games, and, they train every single day and the like, get up in the morning, go to the gym, whatever. There are, in the US, I believe about 500, maybe 600 unicorn CEOs. So these are companies that are worth $1 billion or more. And so what that effectively means is that, it is 5 times harder to be a unicorn CEO than it is to be an Olympic athlete. So then that sort of tells you the level of dedication, and the level of effort, and physical and emotional sort of toil it takes to get to that level. And so I can tell you that, founding a startup and running a startup is definitely not I wouldn't consider it a career. I would say it's a lifestyle. And, it's a very obsessive thing. I think, when I talk to Jonathan, the CEO at Nitra, or think about my own experience, it is, it's like an obsessive level of work. But, it is something that you choose. And so, I mean, I'm sure there's probably, thousands of stories I could say, but, ultimately the only thing I can say is that, it is extremely difficult, on multiple fronts.
So I'm going to ask you some of the questions that I know our listeners are going to want to know. Number one, in no particular order, but my first question for you is, what is the secret or secrets to raising capital in this market right now? Because you've done that really successfully for a multitude of companies. What are some of the secrets to getting access to capital?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I mean, I know it sounds a little trite, but if you run a great business, you're going to raise capital. I mean, I know people say that, but it's not possible vice versa. So if you don't run a good business, it's not possible to raise capital, right? So you have to start from the fundamentals, which is, do you have a business that works, that generates revenue, that has positive unit economics, that has a great team and a management organization and a product that customers love? Like, those are, you can't raise capital if you don't have those things. So a lot of times, people try and raise capital without fixing the core elements of their underlying business. And so, that's, that you just have to fix those things first and foremost. Now, when you get into the actual mechanics of raising capital, there are many, many things that I see people do wrong. Like, for instance, they'll waste a lot of time with VCs that aren't in their space, as an example. So, maybe they'll, if you're a healthcare startup founder, but then you go, for whatever reason, end up meeting with like a bunch of folks who are in climate or, in enterprise software or in crypto or something. It's just a complete waste of time. And so, especially I would say first-time founders or younger founders, just sort of, don't understand maybe the dynamics of a particular focus area for a particular VC, and not even just focus area of a particular firm, but even the focus area of a partner. So just because a partner is sitting at, NEA or SoftBank or, Andreessen or whatnot, doesn't mean that they invest in your space. And so that tends to waste a lot of cycles, I think. The same thing goes for stages. So, being able to qualify investors very early on in terms of, whether they're a pre-seed investor or Series B investor or pre-IPO investor or whatever. And I think the last thing is fundraising takes a lot of effort. The one thing I tell people, especially founders, is that, when I sit down with founders, I tell them, you want to raise capital, that's fine. But what you also need to know is that investors want to make money. And so, they want to make money just as much as you want to raise capital. So what that means is that you have to show them a pathway for them getting, 5x, 10x, 100x, their money back, and, protect from their downside. And so I think that's particularly important in terms of realizing that dynamic overall.
Sure. Yeah. It sounds like really you're talking about the basics in many ways, right? Just the foundation, which I think is just often overlooked, especially when you're talking about someone who might be a clinical founder, or a engineering founder, somebody that has witnessed a problem in healthcare that they're trying to solve, and they don't necessarily have all of the business acumen to build such a strong foundation, and thinking that the problem itself or the innovation itself is going to raise the money without having a strong business model behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that's unique to the healthcare market. I think just broadly speaking, folks who are very technical or have great product insights or whatever it is in any field, oftentimes they need a whole team to sort of supplement their organization. So co-founders help a lot, boards help a lot, advisors help a lot, great managers help a lot. So I think ultimately, from a founder perspective, a lot of it comes down to building the right team and the right group of folks around them. But, fundraising is just one aspect of running a company, right? I mean, you've got, hiring and product execution, customer execution, and branding. I mean, there's a whole host of other things that, fundraising is sort of just the first step, I think, in like the 100-step process.
Sure. So let's talk about that. What does it take to build a business that has $1 billion valuation?
Well, I think in order to build a $1 billion business, you have to operate in a $50, $100, $200 billion market. You have to have a business model that's almost infinitely scalable, and you have to have a product innovation that is materially better than what the market provides today, and to be operating in a customer segment or market segment that's growing very rapidly. And so I think practically speaking, if you're in B2B, what that means is that you need to get to a pathway to $150 million in sales as quickly as possible. And this is on maybe like a recurring revenue, 80% gross margin type of business. Mm-hmm. I would say consumer is a little bit different. But depending on the business model, you basically got to get to a point where you're generating hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. And so you've got to basically show the building blocks of how to get there. And so maybe if it's more kind of clinical or healthcare oriented startup, actually providing medical services, then you need to show the building blocks of like how you're going to open up. You're going to go from one location to 500 locations or whatnot. What the capital requirements for that are. If you're building a device or if you're building a software product, obviously it's different. But in either case, you need to show that this particular market opportunity is going to demonstrate the type of scale that people are looking for.
Yeah, definitely. So what is the number one commercialization strategy that you think is most important?
I think that, the most important thing is that people lose sight of what the customers want. And the number one mistake that a lot of new organizations make is they build something that people don't want. And I know it sounds very trite, but, it just happens that way. Like, you build a device that doesn't really solve a pain point, or you build a piece of software that, nobody really wants. And so, I think there needs to be a very tight feedback loop between customers and product development. Mm-hmm. And, it's very, I tell this to, founders and even to my own product managers alike, when you're going throughout your day, when you're sort of building a company and whatnot, it's very easy to think that you're very busy. You're in meetings and talking to people and, whatever, fundraising, whatever you're doing. But at the end of the day, startups only do two things that matter. So what they do is they build products and they sell it to customers. Everything else is irrelevant. And so, I think, those two pillars of business, if you lose sight of what the fundamentals are, then things can go awry. And it's very easy to just do a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. And so it's just a complete waste of time. And so I think, I tell people in every startup that I invest in or I'm involved in, you're either building the product, you're talking to customers, or you're supporting the people that do, or you don't matter. And so, it's just not, it's irrelevant to the success of the company. So, I think that's really, ultimately kind of what it comes down to at the end of the day.
I think that is so fundamental. There's a lot of innovators out there that are kind of building businesses based upon past experience or gut instincts. And I think that, if we can remove the ego from that and recognize that no matter how much success we've had in the past, that feedback loop with customers is critical. And it's not something that you stop doing in business 5 or 10, that it's just a fundamental part of building a successful business, especially in today's world. Like, consumer needs are changing way too rapidly. And if you don't have that feedback loop put in place, it's hard to be able to pivot and adapt to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've been doing startups now for a decade plus. And I think, every single process, every single company is exactly the same. You start from a blank sheet of paper and you go out. The first thing I do, when I am working with a founder or invest in a company or even with Nitra or whatnot, I literally pull out from my printer, like a blank sheet of paper, and I make a list of, 20, 50, 100 people that are in the space that I want to talk to. And so, I'll go on LinkedIn or whatever and just start cold emailing people and saying, like, hey, I want to know about the space. What do you think about this solution? So just starting from like a very, very open mind, and then really trying to get a strong understanding of what the pain points are for customers. Even putting aside all of the preconceived notions around what I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again is so critical, because I think, I've been hosting this podcast show for about 5 years now, interviewing health innovators. And, after you do that hundreds of times, you see a number of patterns. And there's certainly a pattern of people building products and then going out and trying to validate what they built instead of doing that discovery up front, and then using that to kind of define their product roadmap.
Yeah. And, ultimately, I think great founders will get to the right place because you're sort of pivoting and kind of reacting to market feedback. But, it's just a lot of wasted time and frankly, a lot of wasted capital, because, you raise a bunch of capital and you hire a bunch of people, and then you tell them to do the thing that you were supposed to do in the beginning anyways. So, you might as well just start from the beginning, and just cut some cycles down.
So when I was doing some research to kind of prep for our interview today, I came across a couple of little phrases or sound bites that I thought was just fascinating. One of them was a conversation that maybe you had with a classmate when you were in 5th grade talking about going to Princeton.
Yeah, I guess that happened. Yeah.
And I think of, somebody who has boundless vision. When you think about all of the different industries that you've got your hands in, you think about being in 5th grade and having a vision of going to Princeton, politics. I'm going to be a politician. What does it mean to be a boundless visionary in today's world?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself in such lofty terms. I think the process by which I, kind of get involved in things is very, there's like a process, I think, overall, which is, I look at markets that are in transition, and so, it could be something as simple as like, digitalization as the transition point, or it could be as monumental as the decoupling of U.S. and China, from the relevant supply chains, or the U.S.'s renewed interest in renewable energy, a la the Inflation Reduction Act and stuff like that, or the advancement of some new technology like generative AI or whatever the case may be. And so each of those things, I think, presents an opportunity for somebody to look at what's going on in the market, identify the stepwise function change in expectations, and then there's a very limited time window in which an innovator or someone who can sort of see 2 steps ahead in the future can kind of come in and realize that future. And so that's sort of that's the process for me to like sort of think about whether to launch a new product or think about investing in a company or whatever it is, which is, what is the stepwise change in expectation? What does the future look like as a result of the stepwise change? And then where's the best entry point for an innovator or an entrepreneur to kind of come in and build a company or some sort of product or something around that?
So maybe kind of considering that lens, what it makes healthcare interesting to you?
I think that healthcare has like a very, very, very long arc of stepwise functions. And so there's sort of I think we're still even in the early to mid stages of the digitalization phase, which is moving things to the cloud. So like, stop doing things on pencil and paper and move them to a computer, right? Like, I mean, that arc still seems like it's like, probably 40% of the way through. And so there's probably hundreds of companies that can pop up, doing any number of things from, and there already are, right? From, medical billing to, revenue lifecycle management to, in our case, expense management to, handling reimbursements and the like. And then every so often you sort of see like a stepwise function, whether it's mobile or AI or whatever the case is, that advances technology in a certain direction. And so, but I think, going back to the fundamentals here around healthcare in general, right? You look at the total addressable market, you look at the fragmentation of the market, you look at, how just sort of undigitized the space is. And then you look at just this substantially low hanging fruit, for most ends of the healthcare market, whether you're selling to providers, you're selling to, pharmaceutical companies, or you're selling to, broader life sciences businesses or whatever it is, that there's just like an endless number of opportunities that exist, in every single category. So, anyways, I mean, that's sort of a shorthand way of kind of looking at, how I've been looking at the market here.
So how are you planning to transform healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, so that's, I think for us, at Nitra, the thing that we're very focused in on is really the finances of healthcare. And so, obviously most providers don't really think that much about, their business, right? I mean, they think about their patients, they think about sort of day-to-day things in terms of their office or like staffing or whatnot, but they don't really think that heavily about finances, right? So, how much revenue am I collecting? What do my cash flows look like? What am I spending money on? Is that the most efficient use of money, or whatever the case is? And so I think that what we want to do is we want to figure out, as I was saying earlier, every cent that comes in a practice and every cent that goes out of a practice, should be categorized, cataloged, benchmarked, analyzed, in a very, very direct way. So how does this sort of make sense? It means that if you're swiping your credit card at McKesson, for these 4 or 5 SKUs, you should be able to say, relative to other practices of your size and your region and your specialty, you are way overspending on X, Y, and Z, and so here are some better vendors, or here are other vendors that, other specialties like you are using, relative to other practices in your region and your specialty, the mix of revenue that's coming from Medicare, Medicaid, or from, direct patient payments, or whatever the case is way too high or way too low. I don't know. I mean, so depending on like those types of things, you want it to get to a point where you can run a great business and also, spend time with patients alike, right? So it's almost like
going to be retiring and selling your practice.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a whole separate, right. So like, I spend a lot of time with providers who are, maybe 3, 5, 7 years away from selling their practices, and they've got, a shoebox full of receipts in the closet, and they don't have account reconciliations or whatever the case is. And so I asked them very directly, I mean, if someone's going to buy this business, how do you expect them to know what they're buying? I mean, you don't know what this is. So like, you've got to spend a couple years, like sort of getting your books in order, digitizing your finances. And then when you're ready to retire, just press the export button and then send them the financials, so it can't be, yeah. I mean, you just can't you can't do all that stuff overnight, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tim, how is that different? We've got hundreds of revenue cycle management companies out there. How is what you're doing different than what's already been in the marketplace?
Yeah. So what we're doing right now is we really started off with the expense side. And so going through all of your vendors, your staffing, your real estate, all that stuff. And then we actually connected it directly to in-house financial products that we have ourselves. So we have a Nitra credit card, we have a Nitra installment loan, we have a Nitra separate payments product that are all basically fully integrated into a verticalized software. So if you run a practice, it's literally plug and chug. You plug it in, you get it integrated into your accounting system or whatever it is. You automatically get issued a Nitra credit card that starts analyzing and benchmarking all of your expenses. If you need a loan for, I don't know, an exam table or an imaging machine or whatever it is, we instantaneously look at your financials and almost instantaneously, are able to issue credit. And so it's like essentially a fully integrated, financial solution. So it's not just like the software, but also the sort of financial products around that. Now, on the revenue side, to be frank, we haven't done a lot yet on the revenue side. And I think a lot of what we're doing right now beyond payments is just integrating with other revenue cycle management companies and the like. But I think in our case, one of the things we're planning on doing, I would say in the next couple of months, is actually taking that data and being able to issue, working capital loans or kind of factoring facilities based off of, for instance, the velocity of, the insurance receivables that you're receiving into the business or into the practice. And so again, taking that data and being able to sort of issue credit or other kind of financial products instantaneously is something that we're kind of trying to vertically integrate overall.
So as we kind of start to wrap up here, I want to be able to give you an opportunity to just share some of the lessons learned. You touched on a couple of things so far, but is there anything else that you would want to share with entrepreneurs out there that are listening of some of the lessons that you've learned already in your career that could help them wherever they are in their stage of their business?
Yeah. So, I was talking to someone the other day about, what a startup is from a sort of broader philosophical perspective. And so there's sort of a couple frameworks that I would say that exist in my mind. And I view startups as like a series of trades, right? So like, I trade my career and time for, this company, this ownership in this company. I trade my ownership in this company for some capital. Early employees and executives will trade, their time and money for the capital that you just raised in the form of salaries and benefits and the like. Those employees trade their time for products that customers have, and the customers ultimately trade their time and their money essentially for the products you create. So each of those loops is very important in terms of like you selecting the idea that you want to have, you raising the capital, you hiring the early team, building the right product, and then having those products resonate with customers. If any one of those loops break down, then it becomes a challenge for the business. And so I think that, starting from the top, you have to work on ideas that are interesting to you and not just ideas that are lucrative. I think that I talk to a lot of founders who spend a lot of time working on businesses they're not interested in because they think it's going to make money. And, when things get really tough, when you're in year 4 and, it's Friday night on like 2 a.m. and, you need to get this pitch deck out or whatever. I mean, people just break down a lot because it's just so hard. And so I think working on things that you're interested in, I think is important. I think selecting investors that, really believe in the business, and can kind of stick by you is also very important. And I know it's easier said than done, but, not just taking capital from anyone, but really thinking about who you're going to sort of partner up with. I think beyond that, selecting the early team and being very, very discerning around culture and the type of organization you want to build, is extremely important. And then, of course, having that tight feedback loop that we talked about. I think, as far as sort of the actual business, running the business goes, a lot of people think that startup founders are very risk charging and they take on a lot of risk and the like. I actually don't think so. I think most startup founders are extremely risk averse. And I think that their entire job, what they do is they just constantly try and, reduce risk. They raise capital because they want to reduce risk, and they, hire a certain team because they want to reduce the risk of execution. They build a product in a certain way because they want to sort of get to product market fit as fast as possible. And so I view sort of building a company as sort of a series of minimizing risks along the way. And so just being very deliberate about what you're trying to do, and then obviously going straight after it. And as simplistic as that sounds, I think is just very, very, it's something that I think about all the time.
Well, and I think that, we need to be reminded of some of the fundamentals because otherwise we just overlook those.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story and your experience with our listeners. How do folks get a hold of you after the show if they want to find out more about Fiscal Note, or Nitra, or picking your brain on building $1 billion business?
Yeah, well, people can just email me directly, tim@fiscalnote.com or tim@nitra.com. I'm on, I don't know, all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And so people can hit me up there as well. So always happy to be engaged and to chat with folks.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right, listeners, tune in to the next episode. And if you haven't, like and subscribe to the show. Thank you so much for listening. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.